About 30-odd years ago, Bill and I worked for the same organization here in Burlington. Worked in different offices. I worked uptown, Bill worked downtown, but we shared a lot of the same coworkers. We happy houred after work with the same crowd. We saw a lot of the same movies together, and then we'd critique them afterwards over coffee and dessert. We had similar tastes. We had compatible humor, companionable silences. Though, if you asked me now why it is that I proposed a brief love affair, as I did, or why Bill said yes, as he did, I would have to say it was none of those things. It was December. It started way back in 1986. Bill and I had just seen a movie, and he was dropping me off in his car at my house. I lived over here on St. Paul Street, and it was freezing cold, and we're shivering in the car, and Bill says, so, whoa, you're leaving to go back to school soon, huh? And that was true. I had dropped out of school, and I'd been working for a few years. That's how Bill and I had met. But I had reapplied. I'd been accepted at NYU, and I was headed down there in January to start the spring semester. And I said, yeah, I am. And then, I don't know, out of the blue, by chance, I just said, what do you think, what if we, well, how would you like to have a fling before I go? And Bill's eyes got really, really big, and so I just started talking faster, and I said, well, you know, I'm only here for another 5, maybe 6 weeks, and we could, and it would just be, and Bill said, it would be what? And I said, please? And Bill said, no, thank you, but I just couldn't, it's very sudden, and I said, please? And Bill said, okay, look, I just don't do this sort of thing. I'd like to do this sort of thing, but and he kept on talking, and instead of saying please again, I lifted his hand off of the gear shift, and I turned it over, and I breathed very softly into his palm. And Bill got very quiet. And then I lowered my lips down onto his skin. And Bill said, okay. Barely 5, 6 weeks. We spent so much time together. I remember after a storm, trudging through hip-deep snow up Mount Philo to come tumbling down on a toboggan, and then tumbling down onto his waterbed. It was the 80s, okay, everybody had waterbeds. And it was great, but what I remember most, actually, is the falling asleep afterwards. Lying on our backs with just our fingertips touching, and laughing, and the laughter creating this complex pattern of ripples underneath us. And then Bill would get really quiet, and he would look up at this framed picture on the wall. It was a photograph of him and his father walking arm in arm on a beach in Connecticut. Bill's dad had died just 2 years previously at a family wedding. You know, one minute he was singing and dancing, and the next minute he was dead. And Bill was right at that 2-year cusp, okay, where the grief begins to subside. You don't ever stop missing the person, or you don't ever stop feeling sad, but the 2-year mark is right about the time that grief as a discrete and wrenching emotion begins to subside and unlock its jaws a little bit. I remember we used to take these incredibly long car rides and just to talk. You know, one time we drove all the way up to Montreal just to do some holiday shopping. Another time we drove down to Connecticut, and I got to meet his mom and his sister. in New Britain. And I remember sitting around his mom's kitchen table and talking, and they were remembering his dad, the way that he spoke and the way that he walked, and his unwavering belief in astrology. And not one of them believed in astrology. And Bill was a scientist through and through. But they loved this man so much that they understood that astrology was just his way in, his symbol set for connecting with other people and understanding them. So, of course, it was incredibly interesting to them that I was a Virgo. And as a Virgo, my shining moment as a Virgo was sending him a bouquet of flowers anonymously at work, and it was just a single rose surrounded by a dozen purple irises. The florist thought I was nuts, not for the arrangement, but that I was willing to pay the delivery fee, the outrageous delivery fee for such a small bunch of flowers. We had such a good time together, and really were almost never out of each other's sight. Eventually, one of his housemates pulled him aside and said to him privately, this is great. Maybe you ought to think about asking her a question. And Bill relayed this conversation to me with a laugh and a smile. And if it was his way of obliquely asking me if I would consider answering a question like that, I'll never know, because I just as obtusely smiled and laughed back and said nothing. Eventually, it was time for me to leave for New York, and I spent one last very restless night in January at Bill's house. My U-Haul was packed and parked by a snowbank out in the driveway. The alarm went off. It was pitch black outside. And so I slid very slowly out of bed, trying to make as few waves as possible. Bill came to me in the shower, and without a word, washed my hair. Afterwards, he dried me with a very thick yellow towel. I dried him with a blue one. And then we stood there, wrapped, and leaned on each other and cried. After I'd moved, we talked a few times on the phone. Bill sent me a card. I mailed him back his house keys. But then we lost touch after about a year or two, we stopped communicating entirely. And I really wish we hadn't have lost touch with each other. I mean, I would give anything to be able to sit and talk and laugh and just listen to where his life has taken him since then. Maybe tell him a few of my own misadventures. I don't even know if Bill's alive. I have to admit, I've done my share of internet stalking, and there's nothing out there past about 1990. Nothing. But if he is alive, if you happen to know Bill, if you happen to see him, tell him I said hi. Thanks.